IVM.
Hi, everybody. On behalf of the team at IVM Podcast, I have a request for you. We'd really appreciate it if you could go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and fill out our survey over there. It's going to take a few minutes to do, but it gives us some really interesting information that we can take to advertisers and brands about who's listening to the network. If you're comfortable giving us your email address, while you're filling out the survey, we'll enter you into a random drawing where we'll be sending out a bunch of IVM swag to some of our listeners. Last year we sent out coffee mugs, and this year we're hoping to send out much cooler stuff. That's ivmpodcast.com/survey. We really appreciate your help.
Folks, welcome to Paisa, Vaisa. I'm your host Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and this is a very special, a very unique episode because we are going to talk about a specific event, the voting and meeting for 6 of Franklin Templeton India's debt schemes. Due disclosure, folks, I'm a unit holder in 2 of these schemes, so please keep note of that. That's actually why this episode it's for unit holders like us. So I'm doing this episode with one and only one purpose, okay, which is to explain the upcoming event of voting on these funds and your options. We are only going to be talking about this event. So just if you're expecting there to be a broader discussion about a lot of other things, that's not what this episode is going to be about. We're just going to keep it very limited, very specific to the voting and what are your options if you are a unit holder. Okay, so first, a very, very quick background. In April this year, Franklin Templeton India shut down 6 yield-oriented debt funds, meaning if you're a unit holder in these funds, you can't redeem your units. The money is stuck there. So the matter went to courts, and finally in December, just a while ago, the Supreme Court in December told Franklin Templeton to get unit holder consent to wind down these 6 schemes. So which are these 6 schemes? Okay. They are the ultra short bond fund, the low duration fund, the short term income fund, credit risk fund, dynamic accrual fund, income opportunities fund. So if you're a unit holder in any of these 6, you know that these have been frozen. Meanwhile, since April, a lot has happened in these 6 schemes. A lot of cash has come in by way of interest payments, installment payments, etc. Just remember that these funds essentially hold bonds, which are loans, and some of these borrowers have repaid Franklin this money. Franklin Templeton India has also been publishing the NAVs of all these schemes, and all this data, okay, the NAVs, the cash that has come in is available on Franklin Templeton India's website. You can check that out. So that's all the past, okay? Well, what about the present? So you have to vote to either let Franklin Templeton India wind down these funds. So that's a yes, wind down these schemes, or you vote to not allow Franklin Templeton India to wind down these schemes. So that's a no vote. That would mean that these schemes open up for business as usual. Of course, both these options, yes and no, have implications, and we are going to discuss exactly that. So if you're a Franklin Templeton India unit holder of these schemes, you would have got an email from Franklin Templeton India. I got mine on 7 December explaining all the details to you. I encourage you to read that email, go and search for it, okay? It's a notice for e-voting and then for a meeting for your specific scheme. So I, for example, I'm invested in the ultra short bond fund and the dynamic accrual fund. So I got that mail, right, with the notice. That was on 7th. And you should also check your mail for after that. Like, for example, on 11 December, I got another 2 emails from both the schemes informing me about my username and password for voting. Don't worry, if you've not got the mail, we'll tell you what to do. So, to discuss this present situation and the 2 options that you have, as well as the implications under each, I have with me Sanjay Sapre, President, Franklin Templeton India. Sanjay, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
Anupam, thank you so much for having me on the show. Pleasure to be here.
Great, Sanjay. So let's start. First, could you please explain to our listeners what exactly is the process that the Supreme Court has allowed Franklin Templeton to follow? How will this work?
Yeah, sure, Anupam. Thanks. So, as you're aware, there were 2 hearings in the Supreme Court on December 3rd and December 9th. And in our appeal to the Supreme Court, we had sought their permission to go forward with the consent vote under Regulation 1815C while considering the other matters of law that we were appealing. So, the Supreme Court issued an interim order allowing our trustees, so the trustee of Franklin Templeton Mutual Fund, to seek the consent of unit holders for the winding up of these schemes. And it's under a specific regulation called Regulation 1815C. The Supreme Court also directed that the redemptions will remain suspended while this vote is being taken. And in fact, they've said the redemptions will remain suspended till the court reconvenes, and it is expected to reconvene in the third week of January 2021. And in the 9th December hearing, they also directed that SEBI should appoint an independent observer, and the voting results, along with the report of this observer, should be submitted to the court in a sealed envelope. So this is the process, and this is going to be done by e-voting. So, as you mentioned in your introduction, people will get a user ID and password in email, and then they'll be voting using KFintech's e-voting infrastructure. And it is to seek consent by simple majority, which means more than half of the people who are voting need to vote for whichever option then becomes the option to go forward with.
Lovely. So now let's get into the options, Sanjay. Let's get into specifics. What does the yes vote mean for me as a unit holder? What are, say the approximate timelines, and therefore what are the financial implications for me?
Sure, thanks. So a yes vote means that you are giving the trustees, or you are confirming the trustees' decision to wind up the schemes, right? So by saying yes, the schemes will be wound up, and therefore the first implication of that is that no redemptions will be allowed. What that allows the trustee to do, or the liquidator to do, is to do what we are calling an orderly winding up. Now, what does that mean? It means there is no redemption pressure, Anupam, which means we are not forced to sell any of the securities in the portfolio at whatever price is available in the market, which means we can plan out how each security should be liquidated in the best manner. Now, let me explain what that means, right? If I have a security that is maturing in a very short while, I can wait till maturity and get the full value of that. If I have a security where the issuer is getting refinanced and is wanting to repay that loan and get refinanced at a lower rate, then we can follow that option. If there is interest in the market for somebody else to buy that security, then we can follow that option. But we can follow the best option for each security. So by being able to do this over a period of time and in a planned manner, rather than having to do this under the pressure of redemptions, obviously you will be able to deliver a better outcome to the investor, because you're not forced, you don't have this undue pressure of selling at whatever price you get in order to meet the redemptions that are coming. So yes vote gives us what we call this orderly winding up. So what will that mean for investors? What that means for investors is that the NAV is not going to be negatively impacted by this kind of distress selling, right? So that means there is better outcomes for investors. Investors don't have to apply for redemptions. As the money comes in, that money will be proportionately paid to investors in the proportion of their unit holding, which means there is no one investor benefiting or disbenefiting as compared to some other investor in that same scheme, right? Because there is no difference to say I redeem today versus Anupam redeem tomorrow, right? The last point is that there is cash in some of these schemes already. In fact, the latest portfolio disclosure is going to go out very shortly, but you will see when that comes out later this week that 4 schemes have a significant amount of cash. One other scheme has almost completely paid off its borrowing, and then the 6th scheme still has some borrowing left. So now what will happen is, also once we complete this process, which has been laid down by the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court determines the next actions in its hearing in the 3rd week of January, then this cash which is available in the schemes can be immediately paid back to the unit holders in proportion. So that's what a yes vote will mean. An orderly process, no selling pressure, so a more managed, better outcome in terms of being able to liquidate the portfolio. And of course, once we are through with the appropriate steps as are laid down by the Supreme Court and the regulation, then the available cash can start to be paid back, and then future cash will be paid as and when the schemes monetize and the schemes get that money.
Okay, the other side now, Sanjay. What does a no vote mean for unit holders? What are the timelines there, and what are the financial implications?
Sure. So a no vote means that the unit holders are voting to say that no, I disagree with the trustee. I don't want the scheme to be wound up. I want the scheme to be reopened for business. What that means, the first implication of that is that um, people will need to apply for redemptions to get money. So in the first yes vote, I explained there's no need to apply for redemption. Money is proportionately paid out. In this option, investors will need to apply, and depending on who applies when, the outcomes that investors will get in terms of value recovered could be different. In the first yes option, those are going to be proportionate to your unit holding. Here it will not be that, because it will depend on when someone redeems. The second thing is, because the schemes are required to open for redemptions, it's not possible to predict how much redemption will come in, and in what kind of time frame. Uh, you know, I recognize that for a variety of reasons, investors haven't had liquidity in these funds for a few months, as you also rightly mentioned in your opening comments. So logically, one would estimate that we will see a high volume of redemptions coming in once these schemes are reopened. If we see a high volume of redemptions coming in, we will have to start selling the underlying securities. Let me call it almost kind of an emergency liquidation, because we'll need to generate cash in short order. Now, the reality is that there is something like 18,000 crores of securities that these funds are holding. Right? There is about 7,200 odd crores of cash, but there is still about 18,000 crores that is being held in securities. Now, it's very clear to us, at least, that it is not going to be possible to sell this full value of 18,000 crores in a short enough time and still do it while delivering the best outcomes in terms of value. So clearly, if you are selling a large volume of securities, everybody knows that you have no choice but to sell because you're under redemption pressure, then you're in a distress sale scenario, which means you no longer can do the best job of discovering the fair value. You will have to some extent, accept the value that you get in the market, because you've got no choice, but you've got to fund redemptions. So the no vote will allow people to apply for redemptions maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a few weeks earlier than when they can expect to start receiving money in a yes vote. But it will be a far less managed and far less orderly process because of all of the reasons that I mentioned.
Okay, Sanjay, I've got this question from a lot of people. It's something that I myself wonder. So I have to ask it to you in black and white. Under both the options, honestly, when do I get my money back?
Sure. Anupam, I will have to caveat this a little bit. As you're aware, this is a process that is being, looked at by a SEBI observer and Supreme Court. So the direction we have received from the Supreme Court is that the results will be given in a sealed cover to the Supreme Court. So that's the caveat I need to make. So to some extent, we will be guided by whatever the directions of the Supreme Court. But if I just run the rough process out from then on, Anupam, uh, if the Supreme Court, sees the results and it's a no vote, and we are asked to open the funds, then you could start putting in redemptions immediately at that point of time. As I mentioned, what value is delivered will depend on how many redemptions come, how soon, in which scheme. So Supreme Court hearing is in the third week of January. So one may assume, for example, that at some short point after that, if the funds have to open, that's when the timeline would begin for the redemptions.
And the date would be given by the Supreme Court.
The date will have to be either the Supreme Court would give the date, or they would give some direction to say, okay, here is the result. You now move forward as per the result. If you give a yes vote, the only process that the regulation requires, assuming again the Supreme Court doesn't give a different direction or says, okay, if they say go ahead with the next step as the regulations currently stand, then we have to do a second vote. That's called an authorization vote. It's under a different regulation. And in that vote, unit holders will be selecting, is it going to be the trustee that continues to run and manage this process, or will it be someone else? And if you recall, we had actually announced this vote way back in May of 2020 already, but couldn't happen
Correct.
for a variety of reasons. So that vote would have to take place. But that is only a 3.5 week process, because it's a 21-day notice and then a few days to declare the to declare the results. So in my mind, I don't know the exact start date because the Supreme Court will declare the results. But in my mind, the difference between when you can place a redemption and when you can get the cash available in the schemes is 4 weeks. Is 4 weeks in my mind.
Okay. Okay, right. Thanks for that, Sanjay. Sanjay, so now let's just get back to the process, right? If I'm a unit holder, how do I move forward from here? For example, let's just say that I have not got the email. I have got the email, so I know exactly what to do. Just to recap the dates, folks, the voting starts on 26, 27, 28, and the meeting is on 29th. So if for someone who's not got the email, Sanjay, what should they do? Can they reach out to you?
Of course, they can reach out to us. They can write to any of our service IDs. And I think people have been reaching out to us. So service@franklintempleton.com, unit holder, meet at Franklin Templeton. There are a couple of different ways to reach out. You can call the call center and tell us that you haven't received your email ID. So that's fine. People not only can but should reach out and let us know if they've not got it. Anupam, we've talked about email a couple of times. I also want to clarify that if you didn't have an email ID registered with us, but you had a mobile number registered with us, you would have got this on your mobile. So don't just look in your email, don't just look in your spam folder, because sometimes this can end up in spam, but do also check your SMSs and your for this as well, Anupam.
Given the pandemic and God knows whatnot, was anything sent by postal mail for people who had neither? Just asking because that's probably one area that I've not covered.
No, it wasn't sent by postal mail, but through
Okay.
a combination of we did a long time ago. Sorry, the first time we did the voting, I shouldn't say a long time ago. We had put out a notice in the newspaper asking people to give their email IDs. We had put out, not only one but a number of ads at that point of time in the print, and we had reached out through various means to try and get more email IDs from unit holders. So I think at this point we can reach, Anupam, over 98% of investors through a combination of email and mobile.
That's good to know. And if the balance 2% is listening to this podcast as we speak, folks, like Sanjay said, please check out the website. There's enough information out there. Sanjay just gave the email address, which I believe is service, right? SERVICE at franklintempletonindia.com.
No, SERVICE service@franklintempleton.com.
Okay, service at franklintempleton.com. Sorry about that. Just reach out to them. There's also an IVRS, and just go on the website, and there's plenty of detail out there. Okay, now coming back, Sanjay, just to recap on the event side, what happens during the voting? So the dates for the voting and what happens in the meeting exactly? How are these two events different from each other?
Sure. Let's take the voting first, and then we'll take the meeting. The MCA, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, has actually laid down guidelines for e-voting and unit holder AGMs that are taking place during the pandemic. So we are following that process. So people have also asked, how did you evolve this process? We didn't evolve the process. We are following the laid down guidelines in that circular. And what that says is you have to do e-voting for 3 days and followed by the unit holder meet. So as you rightly said, 9 a.m. India time on December 26th, the voting portal, which is on KFintech, will open, and it will remain open till 6 p.m. on December 28th. Assuming you have your user ID and password, and let me also clarify, Anupam, if you have the same PAN registered, like you said, you are a unit holder in 2 schemes,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You would have got 2 emails, but the user ID password in both emails will be the same. So you don't have to remember multiple user ID passwords for multiple schemes. So you go to the KFintech website anytime between the times that I mentioned, 26th and 28th, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Log in with your user ID and password. The website will force you to change your password the first time you log in. You then select the e-voting event, and each scheme is one e-voting event. So in your case, you'll first maybe select on ultra short. Then it will give you the option of voting. You will then select your option of either yes or no, submit that. Then you can come to the main page, select your second scheme or third scheme or fourth scheme, however many you have, and cast your vote for each scheme. So it's a fairly simple process. And that's all that needs to be done by unit holders between the 26th and the 28th. You're just logging into KFinTech and casting your vote, yes or no. So it's that simple.
Okay.
On the 29th, this is the unit holder meet. This is a video conference AGM where unit holders can attend uh, and they can seek clarification on any matters that they wish to have clarification on. Now, I should clarify that if you are attending the AGM, you can also vote during that time. So, again, if I take an example of the ultra short bond fund, that's the first AGM of the day. That's happening at 9 a.m. India time on December 29th. And it's scheduled to run for 90 minutes. So you can log in to attend the VC AGM. You can ask questions or you can hear, and you can also vote at that point of time. The limited caveat I would make is that, and you would know this, Anupam, that it may not be, in fact, it is not going to be possible in the VC AGM to accommodate 100% of unit holders, right? The technology infrastructure simply isn't there to hold a VC AGM of 10, 20, 30, 40,000. I don't know how many ever unit holders might be in each scheme. In total, we have over 300,000 unit holders in these schemes. So my only request to people is not to, to be very considered in deciding. I would urge people to consider voting between 26th and 28th to make sure that their vote is cast, and certainly can attend the AGM if they like. But for any reason, if someone's not able to vote 26 to 28, they can also vote during the AGM, provided they're attending the AGM. One other question we've got, Anupam, just to clarify, if you vote between 26th to 28th and you attend the AGM on 29th, you can't re-vote, nor can you change your vote.
Okay, I think that sounds pretty simple and straightforward. I mean, it reminds me of the usual voting that, I mean, if you're a shareholder in any of these companies, I'm just sharing my experience, and if you voted, then the format is quite simple. Okay, great, Sanjay. So now, final question, and it's kind of a recap of what you've spoken. I just want to leave our listeners with this thought. Okay, just tell our listeners the future timelines. The, like you said, the results of the voting will be delivered to the Supreme Court in a sealed envelope, probably in the third week of Jan. Okay, so we are now in December, and the sealed envelope will come in maybe in the third week of Jan. What happens after that, and what kind of future are we, the unit holders, looking at?
Sure. So you're right. The voting happens 26th to 28th. The meet happens on 29th. After that, the voting results in a sealed envelope, along with the observer's report, goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has directed that the matter is listed in the third week of January, at which point they will then they will recognize these results and then give any further direction. But as I said, if there is no other direction that we get from the Supreme Court, subject to that, if there is a yes vote, then we move forward with the next authorization vote, which is another 3.5 week process, post which we can start to actively sell in the market and we can start to return the money that is already available in the schemes. I say we, in absolute technical terms, it will be whoever is voted in by the unit holders, the trustee, or in our original vote, we had given that option of Deloitte. So it could be either of us, but whoever is the appointed liquidator will be then free to take those actions of returning money that's available in cash and actively selling in the market, talking to issuers for prepayment, so on and so forth, and actively selling down the portfolio and returning that money as it comes in. So that process, if is likely to start sometime in late February, if all the timelines work as we might expect. If it's a no vote, we'll have to, the results will be declared and then the schemes will open. Investors can put in their redemptions and the money will be paid depending on when people put in their redemptions. I think there is a recap, maybe just for people to say, in a yes vote, no redemption pressure, therefore a more orderly liquidation, therefore ability to do the best for each asset in the portfolio, and therefore, in our opinion, better outcomes in terms of value. When one talks of a no vote, depending on how many redemptions are received and what is that volume of redemptions, we may be in a situation where we're selling in distress or in a far shorter timeline than would be ideal or than would be required, and therefore there will not be appropriate value discovery in that point of time, which will have its own consequent negative impacts on the NAV. In both instances, as I said, the difference between when you can start returning money, I don't expect to be much more than 4 weeks in both instances. And I think you would have seen that in the last 7 months approximately, we've managed to monetize over 11,500 crores of scheme assets, and the schemes that have cash have over 7,000 crores of cash available. This is in an environment, first of all, when we had, the economy was under a severe lockdown because of COVID for a period of time. It then started getting opened up. So we were not we were not anywhere near a normal market scenario, right? And we were also not allowed to do any active monetization. Despite that, we've been able to get this kind of money. So therefore, logically, once we are sort of freed from those restrictions, and as we are coming into a better and better market environment, we should be able to accelerate the monetization. And in fact, we had put out a maturity profile, and even without the ability to actively monetize, we're already ahead of that original prediction, and we'll continue to update that. But I feel that we will be able to do, monetization far quicker than what that maturity profile indicates.
Sure, folks, that's a wrap, honestly. Sanjay, thank you so much for doing this for our listeners. Who knows? I mean, 6 months down the line, maybe I can have you back when there is much more clarity and things are, back to quote unquote normal. What do you think?
I'd love to come back and speak to you again, Anupam, and to your listeners. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Folks, that is a wrap on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. I'm going to have 3 disclaimers out here loud and clear so that all of y'all can listen up. Okay, so disclaimer number 1, you've heard from Franklin Templeton India. I encourage you, to explore other points of view like those from investor groups, to understand their perspective. So please read what they have to say. Disclosure number 2, nothing discussed in this episode is specific financial advice. Please, probably say please 100 times, consult your financial advisor before taking any action. Okay, this episode is exclusively for explaining the yes and no options available to you. There is no advice out here. Consult your financial advisor, do your own research. And third and finally, just to repeat my disclaimer, I am a unit holder in 2 schemes, so please keep that in mind. You must consider me as biased. Aside from that, thank you so much for listening to this really special episode of Paisa Vaisa.
No material on the show should be considered as financial advice. The material on the show is for informational purposes only. Please consult a financial advisor before taking any investment decision.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Once again, just a quick reminder, please do help us out by filling out our survey. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. It really does help us figure out who's listening and, what are the characteristics that we can go and push to advertisers. That is massively helpful to us. Please do help out with that. So, on the network this week, let me start with a quick milestone. It's the 100th episode of Begin the Journey with Ashish Vidyarthi. Congratulations to Ashish and the team. Great show. If you're not listening to it, he talks to you about just how to approach life. It's just very, very cool stuff. Do check this out. Want to mention the note with Maruk Inayat. She talks about why petrol prices are so high. On the Wire Talk, Siddharth speaks with Harsh Mandar. On Advertising is Dead, Varun speaks to Kabir Biswas, the founder of Dunzo. They have a really interesting conversation about, what's the future of Dunzo and what they're thinking about. on the Traveling Professor's Diaries. Check out Siddharth talk about the performance paradox. I found it really fascinating and interesting. I think that you guys will really get something out of listening to that. Please do give that a listen. And finally, let me mention Zindagi Diaries. It's Ragini Kumar's poetry podcast. The first week when it came out, we put out 5 poems first week. We put out another 5 poems this week, and the response has been phenomenal. Do check it out. It's in Hindi. It's a poetry podcast. Something a little different. Do give it a shot and let us know what you think. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What are some of the radical changes that are now shaping our workspace? With physical distancing and heightened safety protocols being the norm, will technology finally make its large-scale entry to the workspace? Will design as we know it change for the long term? Is it possible for the Indian commercial real estate space to adopt a 360-degree approach to sustainability? Join our hosts at the Future of Space podcast by RMZ as we deliberate with industry leaders, analysts, and bright young minds on the way forward for the workspace given the new COVID normal. Tune in to the IVM Podcasts app or wherever you stream your favorite podcasts